Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to my presentation, 20 Jewish Personalities of whom you might be blissfully unaware. In May 2019, the Israel Supreme Court ruled that the first drafts of Israel's Declaration of Independence should belong to the nation and not to the family of the man who wrote it. That would seem obvious. Less obvious, mostly forgotten, is the story of that man, Ukrainian-born Mordechai Beham. In April 1948, Beham, a lawyer, was asked to draft a Declaration of Independence for the states not yet born. He used quotes from the American Declaration of Independence and also, "Behold, I have set a land before you." This comes from Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 8. Over the 3 weeks, Beham's draft was reworked, completed an hour before the final version was proclaimed by Ben-Gurion on May the 14th. Beham's involvement went unremembered until a law professor in the 90s sought the Declaration's roots. He uncovered Beham's role and visited his widow, who still had the papers in a box. Comparing the text, he saw that though few of Beham's words made it through to the final text, its structure did. Beham had decided the declaration should have 2 segments, one presenting the history of the Jews, the second building upon it to proclaim future intents. Everyone who came after him worked within his structure. The legend claiming that the final paragraph is in fact a nod in God's direction to satisfy both secularists and religious is a great story, but untrue. When Beham came to translating firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, he was stuck and asked a rabbinical neighbor for help. The neighbor suggested he use the liturgical phrase, Shur Yisrael, Rock of Israel. The draft would be edited, succumbing at the very end to Ben-Gurion's pen, but Rock of Israel survived. It was indeed a compromise between religious and secular, but not in 1948. It was a compromise from the 1776 Declaration. That's how it got in, thanks to Beham, not as a compromise at the end, but from the very beginning. Beham died in 1987. His family, fallen on hard times, tried to auction drafts of the Declaration, hoping for $1 million. The sale was blocked. The Supreme Court deemed that the papers the family kept for some 70 years were state property and were to be given to the National Archive, where they now reside. Not far from where the Hilton Tel Aviv stands today, a plaque bears testimony to a murder that shook the Yishuv and resonates to this day. The identity of the perpetrators remain a mystery. The various accusations causing Chief Rabbi Cook to denounce the affair a blood libel of Jews against Jews. Born 1899 in Ukraine, Chaim Lozorov joined his local Zionist Labour Party and soon assumed leadership. He attracted attention by proposing new methods of financing Zionist settlements, at one time believing that cooperation between Arab and Jewish nationalists was possible. He settled in Palestine in 1924 and in 1926 became a member of the Yishu's delegation to the League of Nations Permanent Mandates Commission. He became Mapai spokesman and leader. At the 17th Zionist Congress, he was elected a member of the Zionist and Jewish Agency Executive and headed its political department. In 1933, he organized mass emigration of Jews and their property from Nazi Germany to Palestine under a controversial scheme called Havara. On a Friday night in June 1933, he was walking with his wife on the beach in Tel Aviv. 2 strangers asked him the time. Once Lozorov was identified, he was shot. Various conspiracy theories abound. Was it supporters of Jabotinsky or those supporters of a German boycott annoyed at his scheme to support German industry? Or perhaps agents of Joseph Goebbels, who suspected him of having an affair with his wife. The subsequent court case ended in acquittal for the two accused of the crime. One was to diabol the Altalena, bringing in arms in defiance of Ben Gurion. The case has never been definitively solved, despite Begin, when Prime Minister, commissioning an inquiry. The trial proceedings of the murder of Lozorov highlighted the external and internal dynamics between the ruling British mandate, the dominant Mapai party, and the opposing revisionist party. This event was an important climax point in the internal relations of the Jews of Palestine, and its resonance continued even after the State of Israel was established in 1948. Born in Volozhin, Russia in 1880, the son of Rabbi Naftali Zev Yuva Berlin, the Nitziv, head of its famous yeshiva. As a young man, Meir joined the Mizrahi movement, representing it at the 7th Zionist Congress in 1905, at which, unlike the majority of Mizrahi delegates, he voted against the Uganda scheme. In 1911, he was appointed Secretary of World Mizrahi in Berlin. It was he who coined the Mizrahi slogan, Eretz Yisrael Am Yisrael Al Pi Torat Yisrael, the land of Israel for the people of Israel, according to the Torah of Israel. He moved to the US in 1915, served as president of the US Mizrahi while making a living selling life insurance, and from 1925 was a member of the board of directors of the JNF. In 1926, he settled in Jerusalem, playing a leading role in Jewish communal life. He was a leading opponent of the Palestine Partition Plan in 1937 and the White Paper of 1939, advocating civil disobedience and complete non-cooperation of the Jewish population with the British authorities. During the Second World War, he lobbied ferociously in the US on behalf of European Jewry and for the necessity of a Jewish homeland, returning to Palestine in 1944. After the re-establishment of the State of Israel, he organized a committee of scholars to examine the legal problems of the new state in the light of Jewish law. He died in 1949, having changed his name from Berlin to Bar Ilan. The university near Tel Aviv, founded by the American Mizrahi movement, is named in his honor, as is the Meir Forest in the Hebron Hills and the Moshav Bet Meir near Jerusalem. Her adventure began with a bet. In 1894, a Boston gentleman wagered $10,000 that no woman could travel around the world by bicycle. Although it is unclear why she was chosen, Annie Cohen Kopchowski, better known as Annie Londonderry for reasons that will become clear, set out from Boston in June 1894 to attempt the journey. Married with 3 children under 6, she was an unlikely choice, but an example of the ways that the bicycle was transforming women's lives. Under the terms of the bet, Kopchowski was supposed to begin her journey penniless, earn $5,000 above her expenses along the way, and finish her trip in 15 months. Her resourcefulness was soon evident. On her way out of Boston, she hung a placard advertising Londonderry Lithia Spring Water Company on her bicycle, accepting $100 from the company in return. In addition, she agreed to be known as Annie Londonderry. She swapped her heavy ladies' bicycle for a men's model, weighing half as much, and headed east, sailing from New York for France, earning money by carrying advertising on both her clothing and her bicycle. During her trip, she would lecture, embellishing her stories with lurid details of accidents, near-death experiences, and dangers narrowly averted. As the bet did not specify how many miles she had to cycle, she sailed from Marseille to Asia, stopping in Egypt, Ceylon, and Singapore. Touring through China and Japan, she arrived back in the United States through the Golden Gate in March. She spent 6 months cycling across the Southwest, Great Plains, and Midwest, reaching Chicago in September 1895. She had single-handedly circumnavigated the globe by bicycle, proving that a woman can make her own way in what was a man's world. Back in the gender norms of her day, She had fended for herself and survived physical injury and mechanical problems. She collected her $10,000 prize and rejoined her family. Moving to New York, writing travelogues for the New York World, she became a spokesperson for women's equality, Jewish American immigrants, and the women's suffrage movement. She then retreated to family life, raising her 3 children and largely disappearing, dying in 1947. My next character is a tribute to Jewish women everywhere. Her foresight and guile saved her husband from the shocking fate that would befall his co-conspirators. The wife of On, son of Pelet, is not mentioned in the Bible. However, legend credits her for saving her husband's life. Her husband came home one day, excited about the forthcoming rebellion led by Korach, Moses' cousin. She told him, "What will you gain from this quarrel? Now Moses is the teacher and you are the pupil. And if your rebellion succeeds and Korach replaces Moses, once again, he will be the teacher and you will be the pupil. What will you gain from this revolt?" This did not deter On. So, in order to stop him from joining the revolt, she caused him to become drunk and placed herself in an immodest position to deter anyone from entering their tent. This prevented Korach's followers from calling for on their way to the revolt. Eventually, On awoke, full of vim and vigor, ready to join the revolution. "It's all over, darling," she told him. "The ground has opened up, and the rebels, including Korach, have been swallowed alive." To her good deeds is attributed the posuk in Proverbs 14:1, "The wisest of women builds her house." Born in 1914 in Whitechapel and studying briefly at St. Martin's School of Art, he went on to be one of the 20th century's great graphic designers. His work is now a fascinating record of social history. For over 60 years, Abraham Games, he shortened his name from Abraham to Abraham, stating that the ham wasn't kosher, produced some of Britain's most memorable images, including the blonde bombshell ATS poster of 1941. In 1942, he was appointed official war poster artist, the only person in army history to be given the title. He designed over 100 posters to help the war effort, including warnings to soldiers about the dangers of careless talk. In the post-war period, his designs came to symbolize Britain's optimistic spirit. His work was in demand by both government agencies and industry, including the United Nations, London Transport, British Airways, Shell, and the Financial Times, and Guinness. He designed the emblems for the Festival of Britain and the Queen's Award for Industry. During and after the war, he worked for Jewish causes, creating haunting posters to draw attention to the needs of displaced persons, and designed stamps for the new state of Israel, a logo for its airline El Al, and the badge for JFS. His Kona coffee maker, that graced many a restaurant in the 50s and 60s, has become a design classic. He received an OBE in 1968. He worked into his 80s. His last creation, an emblem for a Jewish primary school of the Tent of Jacob, was not quite finished when he lay dying. He gave his daughter Naomi detailed instructions and she completed the artwork. He died August 27, 1996. Games's singular dedication underpinned the strong moral and political integrity, which made his oeuvre so distinctive and memorable within the graphic design of this century. The Detached Badger was a wealthy and influential British angler and fly fishing author, being most noted for his development and promotion of the dry fly technique on English chalk streams. Frederick Halford, generally accepted as the father of modern dry fly fishing, was born Frederick Morris Hyam into a wealthy Jewish family in Birmingham in 1844. His parents, Samuel and Phoebe Hyam, moved to London when he was 7. They were prosperous manufacturers of textiles and clothing. In 1875, the Hyams changed their name to Halford. Halford attended University College School in London, leaving in 1860 to work in the family business. Little is known of his business career. except that he retired from business at the age of 45 to fish. His first experiences in fly fishing were at the age of 24 in 1868, when, through the generosity of a family friend, he was given a free beat on the River Wandle in southwest London. In the late 1860s, dry fly fishing was in its infancy. Holford learned the basis of dry fishing on the Wandle, fishing there regularly. In 1880, lodging on the banks of the River Test, he began research for his first book, Floating Flies and How to Dress Them, published in 1886. The book was a huge success and laid the foundations for Holford's legacy throughout the world as the high priest of the dry fly. He was wealthy enough to take winter vacations in Europe to escape the English winter weather. Returning from a trip in February 1914, he contracted pneumonia, dying as the ship sailed up the Thames, aged 69 years old. His final resting place is Willesden Cemetery. Born in Vienna in 1919, as a schoolboy, he was initially drawn to socialism, but it was Zionism that soon became his main focus and remained so as a lifelong commitment to Israel. Just before the Anschluss, he enrolled as a law student, sharing lecture notes with Kurt Waldheim, Jews being banned from lectures. The future head of MI6 secured him a visa to Britain in summer 38. His parents followed. In 1939, he joined the BBC, interviewing many prominent wartime figures. After the war, he started a magazine called Contact. A much rejected manuscript, New Deal for Coal, by young Harold Wilson, turned up on his desk. The book was a surprise success, vaulting Wilson onto the political ladder and sealing George Wiedenfeld's vocation as a publisher. In 1949, together with Nigel Nicholson, he launched Wiedenfeld and Nicholson. Later, he took a year's leave of absence to become chef de cabinet to Chaim Weizmann, keeping him informed about world affairs. Among his many publishing successes were books by Eric Hobsbawm, Isaiah Berlin, and Marshall Tito. The decision to publish Nabokov's Lolita in Britain in 1959 catapulted him onto the front pages. Wiedenfeld belonged to that remarkable group of Jewish refugees who transformed post-war British publishing into an exciting, dynamic industry. He was preeminent amongst his fellow publishers, both in the range of his interests and activism and in his capacity for international networking, building bridges across Europe and beyond. He befriended popes, prime ministers, and presidents. He died in January 2016 and is buried on the Mount of Olives. In the 1930s, English cinema was about to be joined by young Hungarian Jews that would form one half of a formidable cinematic partnership that would change the shape of British films. In 1933, after the Nazis came to power, the main German studio sacked all its Jewish employees, so he fled to France. In 1935, he decided he would do better in England, despite speaking no English. He was introduced to Alexander Korda, owner of London Films, who employed him as a screenwriter. Asked to improve a script, he met the film's director, Michael Powell. Their partnership would produce some of the finest British films of the 40s and 50s under the banner of the Archers. Emmerich Pressburger often showed a deep understanding of the British, only granted to those outside looking in. He always prided himself on being more English than the English. After all, some of us were just born English, but he chose to become English. Among the many films produced by this formidable partnership were The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, A Matter of Life and Death, The Red Shoes, and The Battle of the River Plate. He was made a Fellow of BAFTA in 1981 and a Fellow of the British Film Institute in 1983. In 2014, an English Heritage Blue Plaque was erected to commemorate him and Michael Powell at their old offices in London. The plaque was unveiled by Martin Scorsese. He spent his last days at Shoemaker Cottage, Aspel in Suffolk, in the English countryside that he loved so well. He is buried in the cemetery of Our Lady of Grace Church the only grave in that churchyard with a Magen David. In 1948, a time when Jewish parents were intent on raising their young sons to be fine English gentlemen, one man had a vision and belief that he could instead mold these children into authentic Jews. Born in 1913, he studied at Eitz Chaim Yeshiva, then on to the famous Mir in Lithuania. Returning just before the war, he was appointed the first rabbi of the Higher Crumpsall congregation in Manchester. In 1944, he was appointed the communal rabbi of Glasgow. In 1946, he was invited to become principal rabbi of the Federation of Synagogues. When Chief Rabbi Hertz died in 1946, he was regarded as the most exciting prospect to succeed him. But the conflicts of the Hertz era led the United Synagogue to opt for a safe pair of hands. Instead of a charismatic, mercurial individualist, they appointed Israel Brody. By 1948, Rabbi Koppel Rosen had grown disillusioned with the rabbinate in general and the Federation in particular. He felt that education held the key to Jewish survival, and Anglo-Jewry was not noted as a community of scholars or its Jewish academic institutions. His dream was to build the equivalent of the English public school, combined with the intensity and learning of a traditional yeshiva. He founded Carmel College at Greenham Common and later at Monshore Park. Carmel appealed to parents frustrated by the public school quota system operating against Jewish boys, but also attracted boys from abroad, many from Holocaust-decimated families, some from the new state of Israel. From the start, he encountered opposition. The community at that time was convinced that a Jewish school amounted to segregation and would inhibit successful integration into English society. As for the growing Orthodox community, they thought that Koppel's cultural and intellectual aspirations were too unorthodox for them. Lack of funding was a constant strain on him, and his wife Bella, who once pawned her engagement ring to provide breakfast for the pupils. Slowly the school grew, gaining a serious academic reputation and communal support. Carmel grew and became one of the premier schools of the Jewish world. He delighted in Carmel's success in rowing, dreaming of his pupils going to Oxbridge as athletes, whose religious commitment would cause the annual boat race to be postponed. He encouraged music and the arts, while encouraging his pupils to live and master the Jewish tradition. Koppel was seriously injured in a boating accident in 1959. He never recovered and died in March 1962 at the age of 48. In 1873 in Bialystok, a young Warsaw schoolboy decided that the way to world peace and mutual understanding would be through a new language. By 1878, he had completed the writing of the first pamphlet containing its fundamentals. It contained 900 root words and only 16 rules of grammar. It was signed with the pseudonym Doctoro Esperanto, Dr. Hopeful. The Esperanto language was born, the work of Ludwig Zamenhof. For his work in establishing Esperanto, he was nominated no fewer than 12 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. 2 statues are erected in his honor, one in Warsaw and one in his hometown of Bialystok. In 2017, on the 100th anniversary of his death, UNESCO selected Zamenhof as one of its eminent personalities of 2017. His birthday on the 15th of December is celebrated throughout the Esperanto world. On the 15th of December 2009, Esperanto's green-starred flag flew on the Google homepage to commemorate Zamenhof's 150th birthday. There is a minor planet named 1462 Zamenhof and 1421 Esperanto. The English Center for Esperanto is just outside Stoke-on-Trent. You can even learn Esperanto on Duolingo. No fewer than 287,000 English speakers currently are. Born Barnet Isaacs in Aldgate, London, February 1851, educated at the Jews' Free School. Barnet and his brother Harry performed on stage in the many music halls of the area, giving themselves the stage name of the Bonato brothers. In 1873, now known as Barney Bonato, he set off to join his brother in South Africa to mine for diamonds. They became extremely successful, eventually joining forces with the competitor Cecil Rhodes to form the De Beers Mining Company, thereby ensuring a global monopoly of diamond supply. Barney then went on to invest in gold mines, transport, and property. He was a colourful figure, retaining his love of acting, appearing in Shakespeare productions, and often sporting fancy waistcoats. In 1888, he became a member of the Legislative Assembly of the Cape Colony. His wealth, financial shrewdness, and mode of living made him a legendary landlord. All this was to take its toll, and on a journey back to England in 1897, he jumped overboard and was drowned. His body now lies in Wilson Cemetery. His will divided up his considerable fortune between his family, amongst which was his sister Sarah and her husband Abraham Ransom, great-grandparents of TV presenter Esther. Another beneficiary was his son Wolf Bonato, who used part of the multi-million-pound fortune he inherited at the age of 2 to become a pioneer racing driver in the 1920s, owner of Bentley Motors and one of the so-called Bentley Boys, which is a fascinating story for another time. When Hitler invaded Paris in 1914, he gave instructions to find and destroy a particular racing car and redact the official record of the Pau Grand Prix of 1938. The car was a Delahaye. The driver was René Dreyfus. With Lucy Schell, an American heiress, and Charles Wiefenbach of Delahaye, a French motor manufacturer, Dreyfus formed Écurie Blue, blue being the designated color of France in motor racing. At Pau, their underpowered car, managed by a nicely amateurish team, beat the German Silver Arrows. These were the pitilessly organized technocrats with their Porsche-designed Mercedes-Benzes and auto unions. They were mandated by Hitler to demonstrate to the world that the Übermensch concept applied to cars as well. This was not Dreyfus's only victory. He had won the £1,000,000 prize, an award created by the government, especially for French racing cars in 1937, and in various Grand Prix regularly beat household names such as Louis Chiron, Nuvolari, and Rudy Curicchiola. However, his religion prevented him from being hired by the Mercedes team. The outbreak of war found him in America, where he raced at Indianapolis Speedway. He then bought a restaurant in Manhattan called Le Chanticleer. It would become the unofficial headquarters for the racing community, as well as a restaurant frequented by celebrities from all walks of life. He returned to France in 1980 to be honored at the Monaco Grand Prix for the 50th anniversary of his win there. He died in 1993, aged 88. If you want to know more about René's fascinating life, I recommend a biography entitled Faster by Neil Bascom. It must all be recorded with not a single fact omitted. And when the time comes, as it surely will, let the world read and know what the murderers have done. For us, the phrase Oneg Shabbat conjures up that happy feeling experienced on Shabbat. But for Dr. Emanuel Ringelblum, it was to be a race against time to provide for the future a precise record of Polish Jewry. The Oneg Shabbat Archive, or Ringelblum Archive, is one of the most impressive projects initiated during the Holocaust. This underground archive was established and run by Ringelblum to document life under the Nazis. He recruited from across the political, religious, and ideological spectrum of Jewish society, explaining that the Germans were intent on killing all Jews, be they Bundists, Zionists, Orthodox, or otherwise. Their mission was the creation of a documentary infrastructure that would provide a description of the fate of Jewish society on all levels. They asked educators for essays on Jewish education, also gathering testimonies from children's perspective. There are texts written by Jews from all walks of life, reflecting the diversity and vitality of Jewish society in the Warsaw Ghetto and beyond. These included thousands of photographs and works of art. Ringelblum was born in 1900. In 1930, he was employed by the Joint Distribution Committee to deal with Polish Jews expelled from Germany. While others were leaving Poland, anticipating war, Ringelblum stayed, working to the very end. He was betrayed and his family were murdered. The archives were preserved in 3 milk cans. One was uncovered in 1946, a second in 1950. The other has yet to be found. He was born in Rennes in 1917, both parents dying before his bar mitzvah. In October 1936, Jules Isaac was appointed Inspector General of Public Education in France. He devoted himself to promoting better understanding between France and Germany in French textbooks, hoping for less likelihood of another war between them. In 1939, he was considered one of the most prominent historians of his time. His career ended with the German occupation of France. Prior to his family's departure to Auschwitz, his wife told him, "Save yourself for your work. The world is waiting for it." In hiding, Isaac devoted himself to studying the problems of anti-Semitism, which he believed was rooted in the Christian teaching of contempt for Jews and Judaism. After the war, he also formulated a plan for the purification of Christian teaching regarding Jews. Playing a major role at the 1947 Christian-Jewish Conference in Switzerland, he influenced the Christian participants to publish a basis for interfaith dialogue. Jules Isaac was received by Pope Pius XII, telling him that Nazi anti-Semitism was a secular radicalization of the anti-Jewish impulses of historic Christianity. This moved the Pope to delete an anti-Jewish phrase from the Good Friday liturgy. In June 1960, the age of 83, Isaac had an audience with Pope John XXIII, persuading him to propose that the Second Vatican Council pass a declaration that reworked the traditional accusation that Jews had been guilty of deicide. This was to be the famous Nostra Aetate in our time. With Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church took leave from an almost 2,000-year-old anti-Jewish tradition, a profound break with the age-old teaching of contempt for the Jews. It remains the definitive document on Catholic attitudes towards Jews. Jules died in September 1963, like Pope John XXIII, not living to see its publication. However, the document was the culmination of Isaac's work in Jewish-Christian relations, and his voice could be heard echoing in it. At the center of a tombstone in Wilson Cemetery is the word scientist, followed by the inscription, "Her research and discoveries on viruses remain of lasting benefit to mankind." It is a travesty that Rosalind Franklin is mostly remembered for not receiving full credit for her contributions to discovery of DNA structure. That part of Franklin's life story must never be forgotten, but she was so much more than the wronged heroine, and any list of prominent Jewish people and their contribution to a better world must include her. Born July 1920, she attended St. Paul's School. She graduated with a degree in natural sciences from Newnham College, Cambridge in 1941, taking up a position researching coal in 1942. This research earned her PhD from Cambridge in 1945. Moving to Paris in 1947, she became an accomplished X-ray crystallographer. She joined King's College London in 1951 as a research associate and discovered the key properties of DNA, which eventually facilitated the correct description of the double helix structure of DNA. She moved to Birkbeck College in 1953, leading pioneering work on the molecular structure of viruses. On the day before she was to unveil the structure of tobacco mosaic virus at an international fair in Brussels, she died of ovarian cancer in 1958 at the age of 37. She will remain the unsung heroine who took the crucial X-ray, photo 51, enabling James Watson and Francis Crick to build their double helix model of DNA, and was unjustly deprived of a Nobel Prize. The instant I saw the picture, my mouth fell open and my pulse began to race, wrote Watson in his book, The Double Helix. The black cross of reflections which dominated the picture could only arise from a helical structure. As one of the 20th century's preeminent scientists, Franklin's work has indeed benefited all of humanity. Now on to another female hero, this time one who brought about a change in the way Orthodox Jewish girls were educated. In 1917, she founded an afternoon school in her apartment in Krakow that was later to become established as a Beis Yaakov, House of Jacob, school network in Poland, with worldwide lasting effect. Sarah Shanira is one of the unsung heroes of 20th century Orthodox Judaism. Realizing that Orthodox girls were receiving little or no Jewish education, while their brothers were installed in the finest yeshivas, she received blessings to start her school from no less a light in the Orthodox world than the Belzer Rebbe. He told her to start a small kindergarten that she would develop to form the Beis Yaakov school. Notably, though, the Rebbe refused to allow the daughters of his Hasidim to attend. The Beis Yaakov movement grew at an astonishing pace in Poland and beyond, expanding to include high schools, teacher seminaries, summer programs, vocational schools, and youth movements. By 1928, there were over 20,000 students. The movement continues to flourish throughout the Jewish diaspora. Now, almost every center of Jewish orthodoxy throughout the world has established a Beis Yaakov school in order to educate girls. Born 1883, Sarah died childless in 1935, leaving a legacy of thousands of educated Jewish women that acknowledge her as their mother. Born 1872 in Paris, his interest in politics was sparked by the Dreyfus affair, aiding Zola's defense. In July 1914, as war broke out, he became active in the Socialist Party leadership. In 1919, he became chair of the party's executive committee and elected to the National Assembly. Leon Blum's first task was to reconstruct the party, and he is credited as the maker of the modern French Socialist Party and its publication Le Populaire. In June 1936, now leader of the Socialist Coalition, Blum became Prime Minister of France, the first socialist and the first Jew to hold that office. He introduced a 40-hour week, paid holidays, and collective bargaining, nationalizing major industries and the Bank of France, arousing hostility among business leaders who adopted the ominous slogan, "Better Hitler than Blum." Blum resigned in June 1937, briefly returning in March and April 1938. When the Germans occupied France in June 1940, Blum made no effort to leave, despite the danger he was in as a Jew, fleeing to southern France. But the French ordered his arrest. In October 1940, after the French collapse, Blum was indicted by the Vichy government on charges of war guilt. His powerful defense so greatly discomforted the Vichy authorities and so irritated the Germans that the trial was suspended indefinitely, Blum returning to prison. There he wrote his well-known work, À l'échelle humaine, on a human scale. In April 1943, he was sent to Buchenwald, the Germans hoping he might be used as a hostage for surrender negotiations. His secretary, Jeannot Lavelier, chose to live with him in the camp. There they were married, liberated in May 1945. Emerging from the war as a leading statesman, he returned to politics, briefly prime minister, negotiating $1 billion US loan to France. Blum also served as vice premier for 1 month in 1948 in André Marie's short-lived government. He continued to write for Le Populaire until his death in March 1950. The kibbutz of Kfar Blum in northern Israel is named after him. If I confess what motivated me, a woman, to become a rabbi, two things come to mind: my belief in God's calling and my love of humans. Born in Berlin in 1902, Regina Jonas longed to become a rabbi, but struggled with the restrictions against women in higher education and rabbinical studies. Her 1930 thesis argued that there was no law forbidding women to become rabbis, and that there were many biblical and historic examples of women teaching and arbitrating Jewish law. Despite her professor's praise for her thesis, Jonas was only granted a teaching degree upon graduation in 1930, her diploma only naming her as an academic teacher of religion. Jonas then applied to Rabbi Leo Beck, spiritual leader of German Jewry, who had taught at her seminary. Beck, while acknowledging Jonas as a thinking and agile preacher, refused to make her title official, as the ordination of a female rabbi would have caused problems with the German Orthodox rabbinate. Jonas taught religious studies in both public and Jewish schools, giving a series of unofficial sermons. Her lectures caught the attention of the liberal Rabbi Max Dinnemann, head of the Liberal Rabbis Association, who tested her on behalf of the association. Despite protests in December 1935, Regina Jonas received her semikat and was ordained. Berlin's Jewish community was not welcome. She applied for employment at Berlin's new synagogue, but was rejected. Seeking work elsewhere, she found support in the Witzo, working as a chaplain in various institutions, while preaching at liberal synagogues as the deportations of rabbis began. In Theresienstadt, she continued to preach, teach, and inspire fellow inmates, continuing her work as a rabbi. She helped Viktor Frankl, the well-known psychologist, to build a crisis intervention service to prevent suicide attempts. Her job was to meet the trains at the station and screen disoriented newcomers. She was deported to Auschwitz and murdered in October 1944. Born in Warsaw in 1907, a descendant of two important Hasidic masters, Dov Ber Metzirich and Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev. After receiving a thorough Jewish education, he entered the University of Berlin, where in 1934 he received his doctorate for a study of the biblical prophets. In 1937, Abraham Joshua Heschel became Martin Buber's successor at the Jüdisches Lehrhaus in Frankfurt and head of adult Jewish education in Germany. The following year, he was deported by the Nazis. After stays in Warsaw and London, in 1940, he was invited to the US to teach at the Hebrew Union College. In 1945, he became professor of Jewish ethics and mysticism at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, a post he held until his death in 1972. Heschel believed that the teachings of the Hebrew prophets were a clarion call for social action in the United States and, inspired by this belief, worked for African American civil rights and spoke out against the Vietnam War. He believed that no religious community could claim a monopoly on religious truth. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called Heschel a truly great prophet. Heschel actively participated in the civil rights movement and was a participant in the Third Selma to Montgomery March in 1972, accompanying Dr. King. In works such as Man is Not Alone, A Philosophy of Religion, and God in Search of Man, Heschel shared his opinion that social concern is and should be an outlet for religious piety. Other recommended works include The Philosophy of Judaism, The Sabbath, and The Prophets.